Hello, welcome to my channel. I'm Walter and I am here at a local park just about 5 minutes from where I live. I'm just out enjoying the weather. It is beautiful out today in the 60s, no humidity. Many of you know that if you followed my channel for any length of time, you know how much I love to photograph waterfalls. So I thought in this particular video I would talk about how I analyze the waterfall. Now, one of the things here that I think is very important is that when we go to a waterfall is to just not, set up your tripod and then to start taking photographs. But really take some time to think about it. So, to begin with, the very first thing that I do when I arrive at a waterfall is to determine where to stand. That might seem odd because you might be thinking, okay, well, where's the leading lines or anything like that. But to me, determining where to stand is really important. And the reason being is that will help you to determine the angle by which you want to take the photograph, how to determine what leading lines to use for the photograph. Now, before I go to a waterfall, I'll spend a little bit of time researching online. And the main thing that I'm looking at when I'm researching a waterfall is really to determine the angle by which that photograph is being taken. So, in other words, what is the perspective of the photographer? And often that'll help me to determine where I might want to stand. Now, I won't know for sure until I actually get to the waterfall, because that particular photographer may have climbed over boulders, gone down a steep cliff to get to that waterfall, and it might be a little bit too dangerous for what I want to do. So I never advocate at all to ever put yourself into danger just to get a photograph. The very first thing that I do is I will go to the waterfall. I have some idea by the research if I'm able to find any types of photos of the waterfall that I'm going to be going to. And then once I get there, I'll confirm where I want to stand. I really like to stand in front of the waterfall, but sometimes that is not possible for whatever reason. The water might be going too fast. It might be too dangerous. So, for example, take a look at this waterfall. I would have loved to have been able to stand in the middle of this waterfall. There was a dry area where I could have stood, but getting to that spot in my mind was dangerous, so I didn't do that. So I was limited to standing to the side of the waterfall, and I took this photo. Now, standing in front of the waterfall, if you can get into the creek, provides a number of benefits. You may be able to find rocks or boulders to use as foreground elements to draw the viewer through the scene to the waterfall, or you could use the rapids as water flows around the rocks as leading lines. Another benefit is providing a unique perspective. Most people aren't going to be getting out in the water to take a photograph, so your photograph can be unique. So number one is determining where I'm going to stand. The second bit of analysis that I do is determining the type of waterfall it is. What's its composition? Is it a cascading type of waterfall? Is it free falling? Oftentimes that is going to be a real determinant as to the type of composition that I am going to be making. Sometimes, for example, if it is a cascading waterfall, and especially if it is sort of a gradual cascade, you'll be able to do more of a sort of a sweeping type of shot from the bottom of the waterfall up. If it is a free falling, then that may not necessarily work because there's such an abrupt change from the water falling down to the bottom of the waterfall in the stream or the creek. So that's going to really determine what type of waterfall, the type of composition that I'm going to be making. So, for example, take a look at this waterfall. This is a low-quality cell phone video of the lower falls at Yankee Boy Basin. Because the waterfall was so tall, the only way that you could really get the photo in one frame without doing a pano was to stand way back, as evidenced by this photograph. After I took this photo, I began to notice the texture in the rock and water in this area, and I really found it to be interesting. So as a result of doing that analysis, I took this photo of that particular area, which I find to be really striking, and because of the fact that there wasn't a lot of color there, I decided to go ahead and turn that into a black and white. Here is another waterfall where I determined that an intimate photo would be the best composition. When you look at the entire waterfall, in my opinion, it loses impact. But when you focus in, there's just something about this waterfall with the different shelves and how the water is flowing over them that's really appealing. After I have determined where I want to stand and the type of waterfall it is then to begin to look for leading lines. Now, our brain processes what we see into a three-dimensional image. But when we take photographs, we are trying to cram a three-dimensional world into a two-dimensional medium. So we have to do something to create depth in our photographs. And one way to do that, well, there's a couple of ways that you can do that, is having interesting foregrounds or leading lines. But let's just sort of talk about the waterfall that will allow us to, for example, to get into the middle of the stream and take that sweeping photograph. So there's a number of ways that you can find leading lines. There's a number of things that you can use as leading lines, as interesting foregrounds. For instance, take a look at this waterfall. I have cropped it to make a point. It's a nice waterfall. This is an okay shot. It's not really dynamic. Once you look at it, your eye goes directly to the waterfall. There's really not a whole lot of room for your eyes to move around. But look what happens when I display the uncropped version. Notice I'm using the rapids as foreground interest, and this leads the eye through the photo, and now it looks three-dimensional. It looks more dynamic. There is room for your eyes to move. So once I've determined where I want to stand, the type of waterfall, what leading lines there might be, but fourthly, I want to determine the shutter speed. Now, depending on the light, oftentimes will dictate the type of shutter speed, because that's really what we are most concerned with, is the light. Now, if it is overcast, perfect. That is really what I want when I go to a to shoot a waterfall, because when it is overcast, those clouds just even out the light. There aren't any hot spots in the water. So I can pretty much play with just about any shutter speed that I want to get the effect. You know, do I want to have a waterfall that has a lot of texture? Do I want it to be really sort of the water to be really milky? It gives you the freedom to do that. Well, my thinking is that it really depends upon the waterfall. If there's not a lot of water in it, then I don't want it to necessarily be all completely milky, because that will take away from the water. But sometimes you might have to, because there's just too much light, sometimes you might have to put on a neutral density filter, which is a darkened filter that will cut down the light, which will help you to retain the exposure, but it will lengthen the shutter speed. And sometimes, based upon how bright it is, and you put on that neutral density filter, there really isn't any way to keep from having real milky water, but I try to keep some texture in the water. So that's really a thought. You know, how do I want for this water to look? And really, it's really up to you. I mean, that is an artistic choice that you want to make. I prefer to have a little bit more texture in the water, but it might be that it might look a whole lot better having the water more feathery. So look at the water, determine the shutter speed based upon how you want that water to look.
Another aspect of a waterfall that could influence the speed of the shutter speed that you might select is what's happening in front of the waterfall. Oftentimes you'll see bubbles, you'll see the rapids, you'll see the current. But let's say, for example, take a look at this photograph. Now, it's not, you know, it's a very small waterfall, and if I just took a photograph of just the waterfall, it would be nice. It wouldn't be anything special. But what really caught my eye were the bubbles that were flowing in front of the waterfall. So that influenced the shutter speed, because what I wanted to do was to make this circular motion in front of the waterfall. I was able to do that by lengthening the shutter speed.
Well, I hope these tips on analysis has been helpful to you. That is a process that I go through every time that I visit a waterfall. And thinking about those things helps me to slow down and really think about the waterfall to try to get the best composition. So hopefully that's helpful to you, that the next time you go to the waterfall, you follow those steps, or whatever steps that you find that are helpful to you. In fact, if you don't mind, maybe down in the comments, share some of your tips on how to create stunning waterfalls. I would definitely appreciate it, and it'll be helpful to the community. So thank you so much for joining me on this photography video. I hope it inspires you to get out. If you like the video, please give me a thumbs up and leave a comment. I love to see those comments. And if you're not subscribed, I invite you to please subscribe and click that bell notification icon so that you'll know when I upload a video. So again, thank you so much for joining me, and I look forward to sharing with you again another photography excursion and video. Bye.